welcome back Edie Melson. If we protect them from all the hurts, we're not equipping them to make their way in the world.
And pass it on. Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today we welcome back Edie Melson. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back.
Well, you've got a new book out that I'm excited about. It's called While My Child Is Away, My Prayers for When We Are Apart. Oh my goodness, as mamas, we sure do tend to be concerned or worried about our children, don't we?
We really do, and that's one of the reasons why I focused in on this aspect of praying for our kids, because I feel like for me, the most stressful times are times when they're out of sight or they're away. Even if I know they're okay, I still have that anxiety. But when I pray for them, I transfer that anxiety into faith and into prayer, and it helps me change my perspective and remember that God is right there with them, and He's better at being right there with them than I am.
Yeah. So why is prayer the best battle plan for our kids?
I feel like that it's the best battle plan because only God knows what they are facing at any given time, and only He knows what they're going to be facing. So when I am plugged into the one who knows all and who loves them even more than me, then I'm praying the things that matter, and we're connected.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of when you didn't know what was going on and you prayed and God answered?
I can. My sons are all grown now, and they're professional outdoorsmen. One has a degree in outdoor leadership. The other one is former Marine Corps, and they were going for just an afternoon on the river kayaking. As grown-ups. This was in August. This was this past year in 2015. And we had some pop-up thunderstorms, and I was a little concerned because the rivers were high, and I knew they were running fast. But, I mean, one of them majored in kayaking, for heaven's sakes. And they're grown men, so I didn't say anything. I told them to have fun and be safe and all the motherly things. And they left the house, and I went upstairs to pray. And I just hit my knees, and I said, Lord, I don't know why I'm worried about this, but you do, and so I'm just putting them in your hands. I spent some time in prayer, and then I just went on with my day. And the next morning I was talking to my youngest son, who did not go on the trip, and I asked him, how'd the trip go? I said, I assume everybody's okay because I didn't get a phone call, and he said, yeah, about that. You need to call one of them. And I said, what does that, when you hear stuff like that as a mom, your heart just dies. And I thought, oh no. So I got on the phone and I was talking to one of them, and it turned out that there had been a pop-up thunderstorm, and they were struck by lightning and had been unconscious in the middle of the river for 3 hours. One of them was caught on a snag in the middle of the river by his life vest, thankfully face up. The other one, when he came to, he was lying half in and half out of the river on the bank, and 3 hours had elapsed. They're fine now, but we just never know, and we need to follow that prompting. Mm-hmm. When God calls us, there's a reason.
Absolutely. Well, your book is divided into prayers that parents can pray for their children and prayers they can pray for themselves. Why did you choose to provide both?
Well, for me, when I'm praying for my children, a lot of the issues that come up in those prayers revolve around my insecurity or my lack of faith or my fear or my anxiety. And so I realized that to pray effectively for my child, I had to be open and honest with God about the stuff I was dealing with. And so as a parent, I think they're intimately entwined.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's a great point. Great point. What is the most important prayer that you think you can pray for your child while he's away from you?
I think the most important prayer is to walk closely with God, that my child will be aware of God's presence. We know God is always with us, but sometimes we do things that block our awareness of that. And so I know that if my children are away and they're aware of God's presence, then that means that they're going to be listening to him, or at least they're going to be able to be influenced by him. Their decisions, their choices are going to be better choices that way. And if they're in a situation that's scary, he's going to be right there, and they're going to be aware of his comfort and his peace and his presence.
Well, how can you prepare them to be able to be aware of that and to be ready for that?
I think it's important that I mirror that as a mom, that when I do things, when I go about my daily life, I am constantly praying without ceasing, and a lot of that prayer is out loud. I know that when our boys were little and we would be driving in carpool or to school or something, they very quickly learned that if we passed a wreck, we weren't interested in rubbernecking. Somebody started praying in the car for those people. And I tend to get very frustrated when I drive with other drivers. And instead of verbalizing that frustration, I learned to just pray for that other person and say, I don't know what's going on in their life. They just cut me off. Perhaps they're distracted. Maybe there's something going on. Or, you know, and I think just mirroring
and did you do this out loud?
Yes.
So your son's heard it?
Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly. And it helps me too, because like I say, my first response is to get angry. And if I allow God to redirect my thoughts in prayer, and I have that ongoing conversation with him, then it sort of rubs off.
That's good. Well, you say that parenting is an exercise in contradictions. What do you mean by that?
Well, for me, especially when the kids were little, I thought my primary job was to protect them and keep them safe. You know, and they were my chicks, and I had them right here in the midst of my circle of love where I could control things. We're charged with keeping our children safe, but the only way we can truly do that is by releasing them to God. And so we spend their whole lives in this push-pull thing of wanting to keep them safe, wanting to keep them close, wanting to do all of that, and yet our job as a parent is to train them to go out, to be adults, and to be good well, none of us is good, but to be godly adults. And so even though we want to hold them close, we have to push them out of the nest. So
yeah. Well, you also tell parents that they need to change the way they fear. Can you explain that?
Well, I think that we're afraid of the wrong things. For me, I was afraid of the things that didn't matter. I was afraid of whether or not they would get good grades, or whether or not they would make the baseball team, or, you know, and I began to realize that what I needed to be afraid of was that they weren't learning the lessons that God wanted them to learn, or they weren't developing that deeper relationship. I think so often we worry about the little things, and what we need to worry about is how connected they are to God. And our prayers can really empower that connection as parents.
Well, so many parents, you're mentioning, you know, not making a team or something like that, that's like it's all that matters. And they feel so bad for their child. You know, there's all this compassion and empathy. Oh, you didn't make the team because maybe they didn't make the team when they were younger, and they want to fix all the hurts. But that's not what we need to do, is it?
No, it's really not. I mean, we're here to redirect the hurts, I think, and to give them a godly perspective on the hurts, because if we protect them from all the hurts, we're not equipping them to make their way in the world. I know our son wanted, early in life, thought he wanted to be a professional baseball player. And so we did the travel ball and all of this stuff. And he wanted to get a scholarship and all of these different things. And then by the time he was a sophomore in high school, he was burned out and he quit baseball. And as a parent, I wanted to support him in that. And I did support him in that. But internally, I was worried. I was like, well, he loves sports. Now he's not going to get to play any kind of a college sport or anything. And so his sophomore year in high school, he took up tennis.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the college team in tennis. He's been a tennis pro at youth camps. God knew what he was doing, and I didn't have to worry about him not getting the opportunities to experience these things, because God already had it mapped out. And I was so glad that I was not negative about when he wanted to quit, and instead supported him.
Mm-hmm. Well, is it okay if we fail as parents sometimes?
I think that we are going to fail as parents. That's just a given.
Mm-hmm.
None of us is perfect. I don't think it's ever okay to sin.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that God uses our failures as parents to make our children into a more Christ-like image.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that old iron sharpens iron. I never used to apply that to parenting, but if anybody's ever had a teenager, you know all about what I'm talking about. And the truth of the matter is the places my parents failed are the places I'm strong. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that the places where I failed are the places where my kids are strong. And so I see God working that out generationally, and that gives me hope. That doesn't excuse us from asking forgiveness or apologizing to our kids, but we don't have to take responsibility for their mistakes and think that God can't overcome our mistakes and make them a better person.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. So you also say that God works in the waiting. What do you mean by that?
Well, life is a journey. It's not a destination. And it's so often when we're waiting on God to do this or waiting on God to do that God is really moving powerfully in ways we don't see. And waiting is really the vehicle that we get on to get to the next place. It's not a static process, even though it often feels that way. It's during those times of waiting that He is honing us, that He is preparing us, that He is holding us back because the timing isn't just right yet. So it's not a passive thing. It's a very powerful thing, especially if we're plugged into God.
Mm-hmm. Well, that reminds me, recently I gave my husband a birthday party, and I was trying to decide whether to do a surprise or not. And my daughter said, "Mom, Dad doesn't like surprises." And then when I told him about it, he said, well, half the fun is anticipating it. So maybe in the waiting, if we could anticipate, knowing who God is and knowing how wonderful He is and the kind of gifts He gives us, if we could, instead of worrying during the waiting, anticipate God must have something wonderful because He's making me wait for it.
Absolutely.
Maybe that would help.
I think that is definitely true. Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Well, it's easy for us as parents to fear, especially when our children are away. And you gave a quote from a man called Harry Emerson Fosdick that contrasts fear and faith. Can you give examples of how faith trumps fear?
Well, I think that we can choose one or the other. I don't think that we can live in fear when our faith in a particular situation is strong, because our faith is wrapped up in God's love, and His perfect love casts out fear. And so I think that we can either choose to wallow in the miry mud of fear, and we get it all over us, and we drip it all over everywhere we go.
And everyone else.
Yes, it's infectious. Or we can choose to look up and realize that God already knows our paths. I mean, Psalm 139, I go back to that again and again and again. He's known me since before time, and I pray that for my children. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm looking at something about their situation that makes me fearful, then I can look at that and redirect my idea and realize that I can replace that fear with faith.
Good. Well, at the end of your book, you talk about perfect parents and perfect kids. Can you talk about that?
Well, there aren't any, but sometimes we see people in our circles who have perfect kids or who appear to have perfect kids, and they appear to be the perfect family and the perfect parents. And I think that we have this idea in our mind of what that perfection looks like. And the fact of the matter is, God made each of us unique, and He placed each of us in a very unique family situation. Sometimes that family situation is difficult, and it's not just difficult, it's really tough. But we have to realize that when we turn it over to God, He is going to bring the good out of that. And we need to realize that there is no such thing as perfect. And as parents, we've got to quit comparing ourselves. And when I started sharing some of my struggles, my boys are all, in my opinion, brilliant. Okay, I'm just saying. But they did not do well in school. And so that was difficult for us because we have professional friends, and they were on the honor roll and in the honor society, and we were praying for them to pass. And you want to take that on yourself. And what I had to realize was that God had a plan, and they've done very well in college, and more than that, they've done very well at life. And so I just have to back up and realize that the perfect looks different for all of us.
That's right. Well, I can't help but think about broken families, and when, let's say, a mother or a father has to send their children off to the other parent with maybe a situation that is less than ideal. Can you give them some advice for praying while their children are away?
Well, there are prayers that specifically address this in the book, and they're jumping off places. But the fact is that we never send our kids away from God.
That's right.
And that's what we've got to hold on to. I mean, when they're in high school, or when they're driving, or when they have friends that we don't approve of, or maybe they're in a situation that we know is counter to what God would have them do, or they're in a situation like you're talking about. They're with someone who has a less than ideal viewpoint of life. And we've got to realize that God can use that in so many ways. He can, if our kids are grounded in truth, He can use that as an example of what a lie looks like, or what an unhealthy situation looks like. And He can use them to bring light into that. He can also teach them what it is to have His protection in a physical way, in a real way, in an emotional way. There's so many things that they can learn from that, and it is very scary. But just the bottom line is, we never send our kids away from God.
That's right. Well, again, her book is While My Child Is Away, My Prayers for When We Are Apart, and this is an excellent book. So thank you, Edie, for being our guest again. I hope to see you again.
Yes, thank you.
Share